Notice is hereby given of the regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Town of Westfield in the County of Union, New Jersey at 6:30 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, April 5th, 2022 in Cafeteria B of Westfield High School, 550 Dorian Road, Westfield, New Jersey. The purpose of the meeting is to transact the regular business of the Board and to transact any other business to come properly before the Board. The Board will have a public Board training session from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Afterwards, the Board will move immediately into private session to discuss matters rendered confidential by state and federal law, including negotiations, harassment, intimidation, and bullying incidents. The public portion of the meeting will resume at 8 p.m. This is to advise the general public and to instruct that it be recorded in the minutes that in compliance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975, entitled the Open Public Meetings Act, the Westfield Board of Education on Thursday, March 31st, 2022, caused to be posted at the office of the Board of Education located at 302 Elm Street, Westfield, New Jersey, and delivered to the Westfield Leader, the Star Ledger, the Westfield Library, Town Clerk of Westfield, Tap into Westfield, and Patch.com, a meeting notice setting forth the time, date, and location of this meeting. Dana, can I have a roll call?
Sahar Aziz. Here. Robin Accio.
Here.
Mike Beelan.
Here.
Brendan Galligan.
Here.
Layla Morelli.
Here.
Sonal Patel.
Here.
Amy Root.
Here.
Kristen Sonic Schmeltz.
Here.
Mary Wicken.
Here.
Thank you, Dana. Mike, will you please lead us in a flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike. We're now going to begin our public training session with Gwen Thornton from the New Jersey School Boards Association, and I'll turn it over to Gwen. Gwen, button right there. If it's green, then your mic's working. Oh. There we go.
Are we good? Okay. I am so sorry. I know green is go, red is stop. I get it. I get it. It is nice to see all of you with full faces. I think this is the first time I have been back that we are able to see each other. So it is truly a pleasure to see all of you. So this evening, I'm here to talk about, let's see if I can make this work. There we go. Operating within an effective committee system. So, you wouldn't want to strain your necks. No, I get it. So, you know, Marion, this is just either on. No. Okay. So here's my favorite definition of a committee, a group that keeps minutes and loses hours. It's always said that if you want something done or not done, in truth, form a committee and you'll never accomplish anything. But that's not true of board committees, by and large. So here's a survey that we took, and I know the data is a little old, but this is the last time we asked boards of education across the state how they operated. And if they had committees, what committees they had, and we looked at how many boards operated with committees versus committees of the whole. So there you can see the data. The majority of boards typically used committees and found that it was helpful, although some of the smaller boards tend to operate 5-member boards and 7-member boards in much smaller districts do tend to use committee of the whole more regularly than the committee system. Next, please. Then we asked boards what were the committees that they had within their district that were standing committees. And here you can see all of the various committees, some of which you have identical ones too, and we asked them how useful they thought they were. So in conclusion, when we asked them that, you can go ahead and do it. Next slide, please. We found that these were the committees, either 4, 5, or 6 committees were the most often named that they had to have. And so it becomes a question of what are the committees that your district really needs to have to be successful to ensure that the district is operating effectively and efficiently in collaboration with the Board of Education. And so when we think about that, next slide please, We have found that committees are best when they meet a clearly defined need, when there is a charge typically outlined in your bylaws that says what is the specific responsibility of each of your committees. And that's what we mean by established in an organized way, that it's very clear to the board and to the public what is the function of your facilities committee or your buildings and grounds, what is the function of the finance committee, of the curriculum instruction and program committee. And some districts name them slightly different things, but typically it's pretty easy to know what those committees will do. Again, lessen the work of the total Board of Education. Committees are effective when the board believes that the committee system is taking care of its responsibility to look at a subject area that you're addressing, whatever it happens to be, whether it's, what to do with a field, whether it's to add a new curriculum, whether it's to revise a curriculum, and that the committee is looking at that, doing that deeper dive than the full board could do, and then making a recommendation, and that the board trusts that the committee is doing what it says it's going to be doing and does it well. Committees don't work well when the board does not believe that the committees are working at an optimal level, and when you give committee reports or something comes before the board, every topic that the committee addressed, the board then has to readdress. And so you need to understand that committees are effective when there is trust among the boards that the committees are doing the work that they are charged with being responsible for. Okay? It's very important to have a clearly defined reporting process so that all members of the board can, ahead of your meetings, review what was done in committee, and such that if you have questions around something that transpired in committee or why something was recommended or perhaps not recommended, you can reach out to the chair to get a response, or, if necessary, reach out to the appropriate administrative liaison if you need additional information or clarification. It's likely that if one board member has that question, it's very helpful to let your administration know that ahead of time, so that in case other board members have that very same question, they can come prepared with the information. It goes to effective governance, no surprises, so that people can prepare whatever additional information you may need to have ahead of the meeting, so when the committee reports it out, that additional data is available for all of the board members to have simultaneously. Okay? Again, in terms of those reports, not only should you have what is recommended, but also there should be a place in those reports for items that were not recommended, because board members may want to know what those were and may want to know why those weren't recommended vis-a-vis what was recommended. So the reports have to be complete, and they have to come back to the board in a timely way so that you have time to read them before the meeting so that you can get your questions answered. Okay? Obviously, having an effective chairperson, someone who's organized and structured, is very helpful, who can develop the agenda with the administrative liaison. I'm assuming, for example, that finance would be done with Dana, for example, as the business administrator responsible for that aspect of the district. And so if you had a question, that would be the individual you would reach out to after you spoke to the chair to get your question answered. Okay? Again, should be done in a way that is scheduled, that makes it accessible for board members. I noted on your website that you have alternates, which I think is a wonderful idea. It's something we strongly recommend. A committee is not 2 people. A committee is by definition at least 3 people, so that if you can't make a committee meeting as a board member, I'm assuming it's your responsibility to reach out to the alternate, to ask an alternate to attend in your absence when you know you can't be there, so that you always have full committees, because that's always a third of the board that will have vetted the information and made recommendations based on the committee meeting to the full board. So that's a very helpful piece that you already have in place. But you want to make sure that there's room for minority opinions to be expressed in those written reports as well, so that if something's not adopted and a member is not in agreement with the recommendation, they have the opportunity to have their voice heard in the report that goes to the board. Next slide, please. Again, in terms of the role of committee leaders, I know that you have an overarching governance committee, which is composed of the chairpeople of all of the committees. That's very helpful because it enables you then to coordinate how topics are assigned to committee. Nothing should come before the board that has not been appropriately vetted through the committee system. So, if there's a topic that crosses over, for example, if you were, let's say you were going to do, hypothetically, a referendum that was going to add classrooms because you were adding a new program to the district, that would have to go through curriculum, but it would also have to go through finance, it would have to go through buildings and grounds, and you want to make sure that every committee has an opportunity to work on those topics in a coordinated way that makes good sense for the process moving forward. So you would have to identify the curricular needs before you could start talking about the building needs, and then you'd have to talk about the financial impact of the building needs as well as the staffing to accommodate the programmatic needs. So having that overarching governance structure of all of your chairs is a way to really work through the process that makes good sense. Many districts have that, some do not, but I think that it's a very helpful piece to have in place just in terms of structuring the district that the board needs to be looking at so that committees are not stepping on each other's toes or looking at a topic that is out of order, as it were, and before it should get to building and grounds, it certainly should have gone through curriculum and instruction if it's impacting the curricular program. So, the work of the committee chairs is not just in committee, but also on that committee as well, and I think that that's a very helpful structure. Thank you. We'll move on. In terms of communication before the committee and between the boards, because you have that governance structure, I think that that helps the committees to know ahead of time what they will be working on, and clearly the work of the committees should be driven by the goals of the district. And the goals of the district in any given year should drive the work of your committees in the same way that it drives the work of the overall board. It's just that the work gets chunked into committees so that it lessens the work of the full board. Next slide, please. Just in terms of looking at the difference between a committee system, committee of the whole, you probably already operate as committee of the whole without even calling it that for personnel items, because at the end of the day, personnel items have to be voted on by the full Board of Education. And so typically those matters are taken up in executive session, discussed, and worked through with the full Board of Education. So essentially, that one area you operate as committee of the whole. Sometimes boards will, not so much now, but in the old days when budgets had to be approved by your community to be approved, many boards would operate by committee of the whole for the budget process, just for the budget part of finance, not for the whole year, but just for that budget piece, just to enable their public to hear more of budget discussions. And so they would go to a committee of the whole just during that budget time when they were discussing budget, rather than just having it be the finance committee, with the notion that that gave the public more information in order to vote to support the budget. We no longer have to do that, but some districts still follow that process just for that particular reason. So committee of the whole in a district the size of Westfield would probably be not very workable. Again, in some of the smaller districts of 1 or 2 schools, 5 or 7 board members, committee of the whole is much easier. As a board member, I sat on a board with 13 schools. We used a committee system. We had a new superintendent who was accustomed to committee of the whole and asked that the board experiment with going to committee of the whole. So we gave it a shot, and we found that we went from 2 meetings a month to 3 meetings a month, and those meetings became extensively longer because everyone felt compelled to weigh in on every subject in every area. We didn't even last the 6 months. We did it for 3 months and said, that's enough, and went back to the committee system, because in a large district, facilities alone could take you an hour and a half. And so we went really, truly from 2 board meetings a month that maybe lasted from 7 to 9 or 7 to 10 if it was an extremely long meeting. We were there till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. And the really challenging piece was that oftentimes when we were trying this experiment, the board meetings would adjourn and the superintendent would leave feeling as though the board had supported a particular item when in fact the board just didn't want to contradict and be viewed as perhaps overly challenging in some areas. And so then I was board president at the time, and they would all call me and say, I can't support that. There's just no way I can support that. And then I'd have to call the superintendent and say, well, you know how you thought that was all good? Well, guess what? It's really not going to work. So hence we went back to the committee system, and things then moved along, and they still use the committee system fully in that particular district. So there are advantages, but if you have a historical tradition where you have committees and they're working effectively, I see no reason to go to committee of the whole unless you have another night in the month you would like to kill and several more hours of your life that you would like to devote to hearing every issue in every subject area that you've ever covered in a district. It can be very long and very difficult, okay? Again, your standing committees, on the other hand, do build ownership. I think they help board members, especially new folks, get to understand the operation of the district on a particular committee with greater depth and information, which I found incredibly helpful when I was a new board member. And I think it does build a more cohesive, God bless you, board administrative team over time, because you get to know some of the other administrators beyond the superintendent as they come and give reports and presentations. And I think you get a fuller understanding of the totality of the work of the district. And I think that that's very helpful. Next slide. So, you know, a well-run committee meeting starts and ends on time, has a planned agenda so that you all know, what's on the agenda. Again, just as with your board packets, you should do your homework on committees ahead of time. So you should have reviewed that material if it comes to you ahead of time, if you can. So that when you get there, you can have an efficient, effective decision, and really make sure that the decisions you're making are ones that you believe are the best for the district and you can support when speaking to the board, okay? Again, many districts, not all, but many will try to send not only the minutes of a committee meeting ahead of time, sometimes if it's possible, also to send the agenda ahead of time, so that if you're a board member that doesn't sit on a committee and you want the committee to explore something, you have that opportunity to say, can you add this to your agenda? It may or may not be possible every month, depending upon the press of business, but at least gives board members another opportunity if they don't sit, let's say, on curriculum and instruction and programs, or you don't sit on buildings and grounds and you have a concern or a question, you can ask that and ask that it be discussed in committee. So that you have an opportunity to have your voice heard in that way as well. And I think that that's helpful in terms of the board itself. Next slide, please. So here are your current committees, budget and finance and budget, or budget and finance. You have communications and technology, building and grounds, labor relations, committees. I made that plural because you have multiple sections of that committee. Policy and, if only I could read that at this distance. Thank you very much. It's just I typed it, but I really can't read it. Curriculum instruction and programming. So that's 6 standing. Okay, so that's 7, which means all of you have to sit on more than one committee, and it means there's a lot of administrative time tied up in being the administrative liaisons to those committees. So next slide, please. I thought maybe it's time to try something, perhaps doing things a little differently, and perhaps consolidating some of your committees to streamline them, to perhaps make them more effective. In many districts, finance and facilities are combined because typically both are the responsibility of the business administrator. Some districts will call it operations, not even finance and facilities, because it's the operations side of the district, which is buildings, grounds, finance, facilities, the cafeterias, busing. I know that's not like a big thing here, but busing, if you have buses, all of those operational pieces become one committee, rather than having two separate nights, because you can't do anything on building and grounds that you don't have the money for. But you can say that about almost anything, but they do align pretty well. To think about it, you may even want to call it operations. That's one option that you may want to think about. Policy can indeed incorporate not only just policy, but some level of, for example, many boards have job descriptions that they work on in collaboration, but do it through their policy committee, rather than having a separate personnel committee, because as I said, the personnel work that you do and your role in personnel is pretty limited, so you do that typically as committee of the whole. So having a separate committee for personnel is really not productive in terms of people's time. And so that's why I was not suggesting that. Most districts have now folded technology into their curriculum and instructional committee, because technology is being used so extensively to support the educational program, and the operational technology for infrastructure, for staff, for internet, for the operational pieces, generally fall to the administration to address anyway, and most of your infrastructure is already in place. And again, because the technology is used so heavily in curriculum, having a separate technology committee no longer seems to make sense. When I was on the board, every district had a technology committee, because technology was really pretty new in the 90s and through the early 2000s, but it's become so pervasive. As even pre-COVID, it was pretty pervasive, but now it's everywhere. So I would recommend that you fold that committee into your curriculum instruction and program committee. Again, your legislative committee, I would recommend folding into a committee around communication and community engagement. I think that that's something that is very helpful for boards of education. It's communication to advocate for public education, which is the legislative component, but also engaging your community and community outreach is critically important, and I think we've seen how important that is. Thank you. How important that is through COVID, because I don't think we can over-communicate, but that would address all of that. Again, you have multiple negotiations committee. You may want to consider, if you're not, you could either make it an ad hoc committee for those years when you have negotiations, and it doesn't need to be, it can be in your bylaws as a standing committee, but it doesn't need to meet in those years when you are not negotiating. If there is a time that you're not negotiating, maybe you're always negotiating. It seems like that, I know. You probably are. But in those years when you're not, hypothetically, hopefully, you can keep it in your bylaws as a standing committee, you can staff it, but they just simply don't need to meet. That would reduce the number of committees that you have within the district, which I think would make you more efficient, and I think it would also help to reduce the demands on your administrators, which, is really heavy for all of them in addition to their regular work. I know it's part of their job, I'm not suggesting it's not. But I think we need to be respectful of the amount of administrative time that we ask of them. And it's not just the liaison that's there. I'm sure for curriculum and instruction, you get curriculum supervisors, teachers, directors that attend those. I'm sure there are folks, including, your auditors, all of the people that end up having to come for finance and business and operations. But I think those pieces would help to streamline your committees. Questions that you have about committees? Yes.
The first question I had was, you said that a committee should be 3 people, and that if the individual member can't make it to the committee, that individual member themselves should reach out to one of the alternates.
Yes.
If the alternates can't attend, because we usually have 2 alternates listed, right? Mm-hmm. Is it okay to go further along the board, as long as it's someone?
I would notify the board president and let the president make the determination of how to move forward. If you've called both alternates and neither is available, you've done your job. And just notify the board president, and the committee meeting can either be rescheduled or he can hunt up someone else.
Okay, and then my second question is there any district that has like a special education committee?
Typically
of?
not. That falls under education because it's an integral part of the educational program. So typically they don't have a special education committee that works separate and apart from the overall, because it's just part of the broader educational program. Because in truth, if you had a special education committee, then why don't you have an ELL committee? And then why don't you have an honors and AP and IB committee? I mean, you could break it down. So they're all component pieces to the educational program. So typically it is just part of that broader charge to that committee.
So it would be under curriculum?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned a governance structure. Can you go over that again of how that would tie in all of these committees?
You already have that, at least on your website.
We call it long-range planning.
Okay.
Long-range planning, got it.
Yes.
And
as-
I'm calling it governance. You
Right.
can call it long-range planning. The purpose of that is that it allows the committee chairs to talk to one another, so that if there are upcoming initiatives that are going to run through multiple committees and need to run through multiple committees, you can stage those appropriately through the agendas for each of the committees that make some level of sense, so you don't have committees working in opposition to each other. And I don't mean opposed, I just mean they're looking at only a particular segment of it because curriculum hasn't yet reviewed it. So how do you talk about how many classrooms we need, or what special spaces within a school that you need to offer a program, if you haven't talked about the impact on the curricular program and staffing and the number of students and all of those pieces. And finance obviously has to talk about it because it has to be funded. And how do you do that effectively?
Can I ask a question? When you were describing your experience with a district that did a committee of the whole, so that particular committee's charge was discussed around a table in a setting such as this?
Exactly. And
Okay.
of course, because it included the full board, it was an advertised board meeting. And so there was public comment at every single one of those meetings. And then because you were doing curriculum, operations, policy, every single what would have been gone through committee comes to the full board table, and everyone gets all of the information in every one of those areas. And because people in the district had been accustomed to the committee system where they used to get it in a deeper level, because you have that opportunity in a committee, the full board was expecting that same kind of deep dive in every one of those areas, hence 3 meetings a month that ran 4 and 5 hours at a clip.
Got it.
It was just 3 months was
It was
all
a
it
lot.
took.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Okay, thank you.
And it wasn't an effective use of people's time. It was also very demanding on the staff, because now the business administrator, the person responsible for curriculum, the person responsible for any part of the curriculum piece had to be at that meeting in the evening. So it included supervisors and directors. If we had a transportation issue, the director of transportation had to be there. I mean, you could have a room filled with just administrators for a meeting. And so that it was very difficult for the district to work in that kind of setting to be efficient and effective. It just wasn't either effective or efficient. So, but it can be done in a small, in a smaller setting. I have a lot of boards that are K6s and K8s, not necessarily in Union County, that use committee of the whole all the time, and it's very effective because there's 5 members and it's 1 school or 2 schools. And so it's very easy to make that manageable, but it's very difficult to do with 13 or 14 buildings. It becomes really or multiple elementaries and a middle and a high school. It becomes problematic.
Gwen, yesterday in policy, we talked about consolidating our committees, and the ones that we had spoken about were curriculum and instruction programs, and then finance and facilities, bringing those together. For policy, we said policy, personnel, and governance, when we were talking about maybe doing legislature there, and then long-range planning and negotiations. So wondering what your thoughts are on that combination versus your combination. I think the big difference is that you have the communications.
I think it's really that communications and community engagement.
Right.
And I just have seen in the last couple of years where many boards have developed those committees as a way to outreach to their community and further engage their community as something that has become an essential component in board governance. It's not that you have to add it if you don't need it or you don't feel your district wants it, but it's reflective of sort of the trend, the sort of change. What did you put with policy?
Policy, personnel, and governance, but thinking the governance would really maybe do legislature, right? Legislative?
That seems like a very strange combination, but you can do whatever works for your district.
Right.
I'm not here to tell you, here, you have to do this.
Okay.
Whatever works for all of you, with the notion that you try to find alignment. So, for example, technology could fold easily into curriculum and instruction
Right.
because it's such a large component piece of the instructional program for all kids, pre-K to 12. So that makes some level of sense. If you're doing communication, the advocacy piece easily falls under that because it's part of communication to advocate for public education. So that is where I think that would be most effective. But again, and policy, I'm not sure why you want personnel per se.
Oh, that was more like the job descriptions.
But that to me falls under policy automatically.
Yeah, I
is
think
that
we were
the-
just calling it out, but that's what we were talking about, job descriptions.
The job descriptions typically are recommended by administration, provided to the policy committee. Policy committee reviews, makes suggestions, tweaks if there are any, and then it runs through that way.
Okay. So for the community engagement, can you give us some examples of what the committee might do? Like what, I just don't know what part, like, yeah.
Well, I think you would work with Mary Ann in terms of developing a communications plan for the district, which again is something I'm sure you have lots of pieces to, and that the board has a piece to that. I noticed that you also have liaisons to all of the schools, so that's a really key communications piece, I think, as part of that communications plan. But if there are other organizations that you want to reach out to or other community groups, as a way of just facilitating two-way conversations between the Board of Education and the community. It's a way of reaching out to your governmental entities, which is why that advocacy piece is so important. And it doesn't have to be at the state level. It can be with your municipal leaders and officials. It can be with the ministerium and the rabbinical council within town. It's all of those partners who are all working toward having a better school district and a better Westfield as a community.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, Sahar.
Welcome back, Brad.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Okay, I have a few questions. So first is I noticed 74% of the districts that you listed have personnel committees. What does a personnel committee do that would cause it to be separate? Because 74% is a lot, so clearly it's a norm.
Because it's an area where boards would like to have more authority than they do. They really don't have any utility because they are vetting information that has to come before the full board. So, for example, you can't hire anyone without the affirmative recommendation of the superintendent. Okay, so to repeat it, to do it in committee and then to repeat it to the full board is redundancy, and so it's not very efficient. When it comes to renewals and that whole piece that you do in May, that has to come before the full board too. So to do it in committee just to turn around and repeat it for the full board and you don't really have any other role in personnel per se that's specific to personnel. You may get notifications around when people go out on a leave or a sabbatical. That tends to go to the board. That's informational. And you get that information as a full board if it's information you receive, right? So-and-so is out on a leave. We've hired a long-term substitute, a long-term substitute to backfill that position. So you get all of that information. There is really no function to a personnel committee that is not the responsibility of the full Board of Education. And so it seems redundant to ask an administrator to spend time at a committee meeting reporting out when they're only going to have to come to the board meeting and repeat it out at the board meeting. And that's the absolute truth. We have never encouraged nor supported boards in creating personnel committees because, quite frankly, in some instances, it is more about meddling in areas where you don't necessarily have an appropriate role, and or just having information before the rest of the board has it. And that's its only function that I've ever been able to see.
Okay, that's helpful. Go ahead.
I agree with Gwen as far as, the board's role in personnel would always be upon the recommendation. In my experience, the personnel function of a committee often is to learn more about everything from our recruitment process to our, evaluation and observation process. Again, provide you with more process-oriented discussions in order to help you better understand the recommendations that are forthcoming. And also, to help you fulfill your role to, again, not to administer the district, but to ensure it's well-run. In order to make sure how it's well-run, it's sort of that forum. That's the reason why I think when we mentioned it as part of another committee, it's because as a standalone committee, you wouldn't have enough content to administer that throughout the course of the school year. But throughout the course of the year, there's certain times where observations, mid-year evaluations, things like that would come up, that's similar to a curriculum committee, better understanding how curriculum is developed. It would give the power of the understanding of those processes to the committee members, again, just to serve as a resource.
Do we do that in this district?
We don't currently have a personnel committee, but again, that's...
No, I mean the process. Do we have it? Do we already do the process that you just described, which I think is really helpful to be able to understand the recruitment process, evaluation, training? Does this district do that in a committee?
Currently, no.
Okay.
Not in a formal singular committee. It's not assigned to any committee, but things are discussed in committee that sometimes grow outside of their specific domains.
And that could also be done through your curriculum and instructional program to talk about, because it is part of the educational program, right? To evaluate your staff, how often it's done, what did those things look like, all of those pieces, and then the rest for mid-year review would typically be done with the full board. But the process piece, I would agree with you. It might be helpful to have the education committee understand that so that they could talk to the full board about here's how it happens, here's what it looks like, because I think that is very helpful information for board members to have, because you need to have that to be able to understand what it is you're voting on when that time rolls around.
No,
every
I'm
May.
agreeing with you. I'm just saying we don't. I shook my head because we don't do that in the curriculum. Not that I know of.
We talked about at yesterday's meeting at policy, adding that to be a part of the policy committee.
I would support that.
And I would say,
And typically, the evaluation model and the process can be laid out in committee. Here are the steps for tenured, for non-tenured, for principals, supervisors, directors, the various pieces, so that, these people have SGOs, these people don't, so that the board has a better sense of what it is that the teachers and the staff are evaluated on, and how that happens and when it happens, and what it looks like, how many evals are done, how many are summative, how many are given in a year, depends on when you're tenured, not tenured. All of that information is really helpful for boards to have. So it could fall under policy too, as opposed to education. I mean, again, some of these things are fluid enough that you can put them wherever you think most appropriate. Just make sure they're incorporated in your bylaws in the description of the charge to the committee.
yeah, and I was just going to add that I think we do discuss the evaluation process and how it works for non-tenured staff, for tenured staff, when we meet in executive session in the spring. Yeah. So that's been a part of our process. Whether we might want to talk about doing it differently is a subject to be considered, but it doesn't mean we don't discuss it. It just doesn't have its own separate committee.
The whole. Well, thank you. Well, we don't typically do it. In the past, we have done committees of the whole meetings. We call them workshop sessions, where we discuss budget objectives or, I mean, that's really the biggest one. We've done some trainings this way. When we were meeting over in Elm Street, the big difference was we went upstairs for our meetings instead of in the regular boardroom because it's a round table. So it was a much more interactive session for most board members than board meetings tend to be.
Yes,
But
and those trainings were more
they're-
interactive.
if they're narrowly tailored, then it's a good time. If it's a let's discuss everything under the sun, we could be there for 3 days.
I just think we need to be more systematic about it, where we understand as a board, what are the types of professional developments that are available, what are the funds that are available, what are the types of, in a systematic way, so that, I think the evaluation, there's been some discussion of that and the tenure process, but, and some general discussions on recruitment, that we go to certain fairs, but I think it would be helpful to have it where it's more systematically addressed, such that, to the extent the superintendent seeks to either inform or solicit info, depending on, his preference, the board can at least be apprised of the big picture rather than piecemeal. Anyway, that's my position. But unless you want to answer, I have another question. Somebody else has a question?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. So you mentioned something piqued my interest in the presentation about the minority view in the committee report and in the minutes. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Who should be taking the minutes, and how, if there is a minority view, there's a robust discussion, which is usually what committees are for, to save time of the 9 committee members, and there is some disagreement, and it's not so much that it isn't brought to the full board, right? So it's just one person, maybe 2 people. What's the
So in the
proper view
minutes,
on that?
if there was a recommendation to add curling as another sport at the high school, okay, and you thought, well, that's ridiculous. We need ice. We need a longer winter. It's too expensive. Nobody curls. And 2 members felt that it was something they wanted to see the board do, and you didn't. That should be noted, that you did not support that recommendation, and that's what I mean by a minority report. It's not that it can be almost anything, that you just may not be comfortable with saying, I want to spend X and more dollars on a program that's only going to serve a very small number of students in that example that I just used.
In a case like that, if the majority of the committee agrees on a recommendation, and it did come before the full board, sharing that information about there being a member of the committee who was in opposition to it would be part of what would come before the board as well?
Yes, because
But
it would
putting
be in,
it-
it would be in the minutes.
Of course.
And if the board is discussing the committee report and someone says, well, Amy, you didn't agree with that. Can you share with us why you didn't support that recommendation? And that gives the board then fuller information. They will have been able to hear from you why you didn't support it.
Right.
For whatever set of reasons you have. And that makes sure, it's majority rule, but the minority voice is always protected, no matter what you do with the board.
Got it.
So that's why it's important to make sure that it's included.
Right, and makes it clear in advance in case anybody wants to talk to one or another board member from that particular committee. And if someone's not able to attend the conversation at a full board meeting, their view would be represented, right?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Yep.
So another question I have is, what's the proper avenue for providing input on a topic that's within the committee, a committee's jurisdiction on which you don't serve?
To call the committee chair and ask if it can be added to an agenda for discussion.
But you want to be either part of the discussion or you want to provide input to it, but you're not on that committee.
When it comes out as a committee report, it's your opportunity to hold forth and provide information and add to the discussion. In other words, if you're not on a committee, the whole notion of the committee is they're going to look at it, they're going to review it. You could provide information if you so chose to do so to the committee. They're going to discuss it, make a decision around whether to move it forward, whether not to move it forward. And then when they give their committee report, you have an opportunity to ask questions and to weigh in at that point as well.
During the full committee,
Yes.
full board meeting.
Yes.
So I just want to make that clear. So in other words, if you're not on a committee, but you have some input or you just want to be involved in the deliberation process before it goes to the full board, that's not really an option realistically. You'll need to do it over the full board.
Well, no, you would provide the committee with that information that you think would be helpful, and you certainly can talk to the committee members and the chair, as well as the administrative liaison, and say, here's my perspective on it. I think this is critically important. Here's all of the research around it. I would like to see the district do X, Y, and Z, right? But you would work through the committee system. Nothing should get to the board table that has not been vetted through committee.
No.
And when I say to the board table, I mean for a vote.
No,
Right.
I understand. I'm
Okay.
talking about more the deliberation process, that if you're not on a committee, you don't, by definition, don't have an opportunity to be in the deliberation, at least before it goes to the full board. So you could do additional deliberation, right, among the full board, or you could, and I'm just asking that question because that may come up.
Another alternative for a committee, let's say on a particular topic, a committee reports out, it recommends something, and you have not had what you would consider an opportunity to provide as much input, you can ask that it be tabled and go back to committee for a review.
But if you ask for it to go back to committee for a review, we've actually had something like this happen, Brendan, I'm thinking. Where somebody wasn't happy with something that we were approving and hadn't had a chance to look it over and asked that it be tabled, but that person who had the objection was not a part of the committee process. It did not go because that person wasn't on the committee.
I understand.
So, and that's fine if that's how it has to be, but should that person have been invited to the committee?
If that's something the committee wanted to do, they could.
Okay.
That's always an option.
We
Or
have to be
if-
careful because our committees are one under a quorum. So if we invite somebody, then either somebody has to step aside or it has to be a public meeting.
We have 3 members to a committee, correct? Oh, 4.
Yeah.
Okay, someone would have to step aside.
Mhm.
Many boards have 3-member committees, and the board president is the ex officio by virtue of policy, so that if other board member does want to attend, they could. Or in that instance, since you do have 4, you could ask one of the committee members, perhaps who's not as vested, to allow that other board member to attend and be heard. Okay?
Final question, sorry. With regard to gathering information and research, so to the extent that we have to make decisions where, or we want to take positions that we find, are maybe contrarian or are not necessarily, or are novel or creative, what's the proper role of research for the board versus the staff? So I'll just give you a hypothetical. Right now, as many of us know, there's a bill which may never go anywhere about the school starting
Earlier
later.
start times.
Yeah, later start times, right?
I'm
And
sorry, later start times.
Later start times, right. So let's just say hypothetically that is also something that a particular board is considering, independent of the possibility that it will be imposed by the state. And you want to do some research on that to to support that argument, to convince your colleagues. Is that the burden on the board member and they conduct the research and then they bring it to the board, or is it appropriate to ask the superintendent? In other words, that process of gathering the information and the data.
That's generally the responsibility of administration, but the administration only takes direction from a majority of the full board. So a majority of the full board would need to say, you know what, we want to look at this, we want to know what the data is, we want to consider whether we should go to a later start time for the high school, and we need to know what is the impact across the district of a later start time. And then if a majority of the board supports that, it's made as a motion, there's a second to have the administration do the research, to come back to the board with a recommendation in that regard, then the administration would do so. But administration can't do heavy research on every topic that every board member is interested in, because you already have all the operational pieces, but you already have district goals that are the focus of this year's current work. So, no, I just want to make the point, not specific to this, but, every request adds something to the plate without taking something off. And I think we just need to be mindful of that. I'm not, suggesting that there aren't topics that come up that are really important that you may want to have someone look at in terms of what you want to do as a district. And I think that that's a discussion the board can have.
I guess let me reframe the question that it would be it would be a context in which it is within the district goals. But I'm coming from a space of, at least in my professional life, we never make decisions without doing a lot of research and office, comparative analysis and peer, what are peer institutions doing? And so I realize some decisions don't require that because they're much more technocratic and much more mundane. But when the board is in a position where they need to understand more, because all of us are lay people when it comes to this position, as you reminded us, what is that? That's what I'm asking, is what is the proper process when it's not some random request, when it's not outside the scope of the strategic plan, but the board members really do need to learn more. What's
Well,
the
I think
process
that needs to be
getting there?
conveyed again to the administration by a majority direction to the administration, and then to say specifically what you want to see. We want a comparison. How many districts have adopted this? What was the economic cost? What was the impact of instructional time? What was the impact on busing? What was the fallout? It may not be the same here as in other districts, but again, I use my district as an example because I sat on the board there. 13 schools. If you move the high school, you move the middle school. And if you move the middle school, you're moving the elementary school. Now you're impacting every parent, every child, every teacher. There are contractual obligations. There are busing costs involved. There's instructional time that might have to be renegotiated. It might affect, if you're using a block system, how long the blocks are going to be or able to be. It's going to affect co-curricular programs. It's going to affect athletics. So it is a systemic change of the first order. Just because you use that example, and of course we've all been talking about it in the educational space because it is a hot topic, because I don't think anyone disputes that for high school kids going to school later is probably more educationally sound. And with a lot of high school parents would be very happy because getting your kids up to go to school at that hour is sometimes very tough. But again, it is something that has to be very thoroughly vetted. And additionally, you'd need all of that research to be able to go to your community and to go to your staff and say, here is the impact, here's why we are thinking about it, what do you think, what is your input, and to get that goes back to that communications and community engagement. If you're going to make a shift of that type, which is pretty significant shakeup for most districts, you really need to be asking your public and involving them in that process before it's a done deal. I would say the same thing about anything that is on the table for referendum. Those are the kinds of things you need to have involvement of your community and your staff at the very beginning, not at the end to say, gosh, guys, what do you think? Because it's a day late and a dollar short. You need that input right up front. To hear what they're thinking and what their concerns are, because they need time to plan if you're going to change those. I mean, I had a district that wanted to do it the following September. I said, are you out of your minds? Every parent, preschool, before school care, after school care, 3-tier busing to 2-tier busing. It had a real impact on the cost, and you add inflation in busing this year and the cost of gasoline this year. Districts are already on tilt from that. So, it's something that you may want to think about.
I might have used, a big hypothetical. That was
No,
kind of
I
bigger
know,
than
and
But it's a realistic hypothetical,
Right.
so.
But
it's a realistic
It's a good conversation to start
hypothetical.
having.
So,
I guess my point is, I'm just trying to figure out where the line is for what's appropriate for board members when they need research, and they need and to be able to ask the administration for the research, or maybe they conduct their own research, or they just say, okay, on this particular issue, we're going to have to get 5 people on the board to agree to make that request of the administration. But sometimes the research is actually, for example, something within the curriculum committee's agenda, something within the policy, or the let's say we're talking about training, right, of staff. And for me, if I wanted to analyze training of staff, the first thing I would want to know is what are the best practices? What is the average? Is it based on hours? Is it based on budget per person? Is it those types of things that I know staff have an expertise in? How do we get that information so that we can even understand the information that they're sharing with us and be able to analyze it in an informed way? That's
Right.
the
Well,
kind of
I'm
gist
sure,
of it.
and you have a long-term, not long-term, you have a professional development plan every single year that is approved. And that comes out of your central office through the curriculum and instructional program as to what teachers need, and here's what it looks like and why it is a best practice and how it's being done, whether it's turnkey, they're going in, people are coming out. However it's being done, that's all information that you can ask through the Curriculum and Instruction Committee to provide an update or an overview to the board of what that looks like. What does that, you have a long-range facilities plan, you have a long-range technology plan, you have a curriculum revision plan. All these pieces are in place. It's just sometimes the board doesn't get to hear about all of that. So if that's something that you think would be valuable, certainly the Curriculum Committee can ask that an update be done. You have unless they've changed the law, and Dr. Gonzalez could correct me, I think you're required to have a district committee on professional development of teachers and staff that work collaboratively to develop that plan for the year for professional development, to make sure that it's job embedded, that it's authentic, that it meets the needs of the teachers, and that it's data driven and it's based in scientific learning principles.
Yep. I think just like an overall, if you're looking for a line, if it's something that's already on the administration's radar, then a simple question might get you the answer you're looking for. But if it's a new idea that you're bringing forth that's going to require research or devotion of new time, then it comes to the board and we can assign it to a committee that can then work with the administration on it. But if it's something we're already working on, then the answer might already be there.
Yeah, no, they're valuable questions to ask.
And they're questions we've all had.
Yes, so it's a good thing to ask them, because then you get an answer, hopefully. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, I will leave you to reorganizing your committees and to close session. Thank you for your time and attention. Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. I thank you all for bearing with us while we finished up our training. And all right, thank you. If you've been keeping up with Westfield High School athletics, you know that our winter sports teams have had one of the most successful seasons in quite a while. They've captured national, state, sectional, county, and individual titles. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome two of our state championship teams, beginning with our history-making girls varsity basketball team. The Blue Devils have had an amazing season, winning the first ever North 2 Group 4 sectional championship before earning the Group 4 state title for the first time in the program's 50-year history. I'll leave it to Coach McKeon to say more about these talented student athletes, but first I will call each of you up to receive a certificate of recognition from our superintendent, Dr. Raymond Gonzalez. I'll ask that you move on to the stage after receiving your certificate to await a group photograph. Alphabetically, we'll begin with Ava Burke. I apologize in advance, Katie Kryanopoulos. Aaron Doherty. Sutton Factor. Paige Gorsica. Grace Clegg. Chloe Cruiser. McKenna Reed. Sarah Rooney. Annie Ryan. Cara Van Allen. Lizzie Verano. Team manager Kate Fisher. Volunteer coach Marcy Williams. Assistant coach Brian Simnecki. And head coach Liz McKeon, who was named Girls Basketball Coach of the Year by the Courier News. Coach McKeon, would you like to say a few words before joining your team on stage for the photograph?
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you for having us. These girls are historic, to say the least. We had a goal at the beginning of the season to be successful. Our mantra this year was "We before me," in case you could see on the back of our shirts. Westfield is how we like to go by. And these girls did an excellent job. As a head coach, you always want everyone to put the team before themselves. That's what you want, right? But do you always get it? No. But a lot of people asked this year, why this team? Why did they make history? Why did they win the section? Why did they become the first state champions in school history? Because they embodied the we before me. There's not one girl on this team that didn't put the team before herself. It didn't matter if you started. It didn't matter if you got limited playing time. Everybody knew their role. They accepted their role. They embodied it, and they made this town and myself as proud as I could be. This team was just amazing, not just on the court, but off the court. Great role models. If you came to our games, you could see the younger girls in the stands wanting to take pictures with them. These girls are celebrities. I say to them, you're always going to be champions, but you're forever going to be the first ones. So I'm extremely proud to have coached them this year.
I believe you guys are all now headed off to the town council meeting for continued and well-deserved recognition. Congratulations again to all of you for your history-making season. All right, we'll give the girls a minute to shuffle off. They're headed over to the town council meeting. right.
Encouraging, too, to see how many multi-sport athletes we
Yes.
have. Yes, wearing their gear from Spring Sports already.
Next up, the boys winter track and field team, who placed first in the Group 4 state sectional and county championships and second in the Group 4 state relay meets. Additionally, a sprint medley team earned first place in the New Balance National Track and Field meet after running the fifth best time in New Jersey history and breaking the Westfield High School record. As I call each athlete up to receive a certificate of recognition from Dr. Gonzalez, I'll attempt to say a few words of their many achievements, and we'll ask Coach Stefelski say more about their fantastic season in a moment. Once you've received your certificate, please proceed to the stage to await a group photograph. I'll start with the sprint medley team, who in addition to their national title are the Group 4 state champions in the 4x400 relay and second place finishers at the Meet of Champions. Justin Colby. Justin also finished second in the 400-meter run at sectionals and ran on a distance medley relay that placed sixth at nationals. Charlie Garrettson. Charlie placed third in the 400-meter run at sectionals. Joe Pirro. Joe and his talented relay team also placed eighth in the 4x400 at nationals. Charlie Stock. Charlie placed sixth in the 800-meter at nationals and first in sectionals, Group 4 states, and Meet of Champions in the 800-meter. Placing fourth nationally in the 4x1 mile relay at New Balance meet and setting a new Westfield High School indoor record are Connor Daly. Connor placed third at sectionals and fourth at Group 4 states in the 3,200 meter while breaking a high school record at the Meet of Champions in his seventh place finish. He also ran on the distance medley relay that placed sixth at nationals. These are really talented guys. You got to give me a minute. Avery Keith. Avery broke a county and school record for the 3,200 meter with a sixth place finish at the Meet of Champions. He finished third at sectionals and states in the 3,200 meter and fourth in the 1,600 meter at sectionals. He also ran on the distance medley relay team that placed sixth at nationals. Ben Hacker. Ben placed fifth in the 3,200 meter run at sectionals. Liam Murillo. Liam finished sixth at sectionals in the 1,600 meter. The following athletes placed 17th nationally in the 4x800 and performed well in other relay races as well, including a third place finish at the State Meet of Champions. Daniel Cortez. Jimmy Gilday. Graham Corrins. And Johnny Scalia, who also placed sixth at nationals in the 800 meter and ran on the distance medley relay team that placed sixth at nationals. There were many other achievements as well. Adrian Becker. Adrian ran with the second place sectional in the 4x400 relay team. Max Owens. Max is the sectional champion in the pole vault. Owen Paul. As a shot putter, Owen placed third at sectionals, fifth in Group 4 states, and 17th at the Meet of Champions. Noah Petrazzi. Noah joined Justin Colby and Charlie Garrettson and Charlie Stock in the third place Group 4 state relay finish in the 4x400. Max Romano. Max placed 5th at the sectionals in the shot put. Leo Schwartz. Leo placed 4th at sectionals in the high jump. Ben Spergel. 55-meter hurdles. Evan Tompkins. Evan joined Justin Colby, Charlie Garrettson, and Charlie Stock as a Group 4 state relay champion in the sprint medley relay. Now I'll invite assistant coaches Eric Anderson and Sam Heyman up to receive certificates of recognition. And we congratulate head coach Chris Stafelsky, who was named the Indoor Track and Field Coach of the Year by New Jersey Mile Split. Coach Stafelsky, would you like to say a few words before joining your team on stage for a photograph?
Thanks so much for taking the time to recognize the boys tonight, and thank you for everything you do to support athletics in Westfield, because this year we're really learning again how much athletics matters to us again, and how much of a part of our lives was lost when we weren't able to do this for a year. This was a team, and people asked, did you know this was this was the kind of team that was going to do all these things? And I think we knew we had pieces in place, but this is just one of those things that just caught fire and took off. And I think that's one of the things that occurs when you get a group of people together who support one another, who genuinely care about one another and celebrate one another's success, who are willing to put others in front of themselves, who are willing to continue to show up even though things may not necessarily be going well for them as an individual at that moment. And when you have people who are invested in that process, great things can happen. And all the things that you mentioned about what the boys accomplished, when you zoom out, it sounds like everything went great every day, but it never does. It's never perfect. There's always going to be bumps in the road. There's always going to be little setbacks. There's always going to be rough patches along the way. And I think really what made this season was the way the guys rallied around one another when it got hard, when we had maybe early events in the meet that didn't go the way we wanted them to, and we still had a whole meet ahead of us. And they stayed positive and focused on the next thing up so that we could rally and score the way we wanted to perform as a team. I also want to recognize there's a lot of families here. Track and field can be brutal because the meets are so long and it's so much time out. And the things that these guys accomplished could not be done without their own personal sacrifices of other things that they could commit their time to, but also the sacrifices that their families have made so that their sons could enjoy a season like this. So I want to thank all of you for all the time and energy that you guys have put into your sons. In addition to the fact that these are just great guys. They're just wonderful people. They work incredibly hard. They show up for one another. And sometimes you add in a little bit of luck too, and this happens. So thank you so much. I forgot to say that. I do want to mention we had the benefit of the time and talent of several assistants. Thank you, Eric. I can't believe I forgot. Ricardo Johnson, John Preston, Mark Chin, Andrew Gates, and Bill Malott all volunteered their time with these guys. And without them, we wouldn't have a field.
Split up to a third row, guys. I think you guys are all welcome. Thank you.
Congratulations.
No, I understand. I mean,
And I'm wearing blue now.
All right. Congratulations again to the girls basketball team and the boys indoor track team. We look forward to seeing their success going forward. At this point, I ask the board to approve the following resolution. Resolve that the Board of Education move into private session for the purpose of discussion matters rendered confidential by state and federal law, including negotiations, harassment, intimidation, and bullying incidents. And be it further resolved that any discussion held by the board which need not remain confidential and the results of the discussion will be in public as soon as practicable. Can I have a second? Thank you, Amy. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We will be back briefly. All right. We thank you all for bearing with us while we were in private session. We're now back in public, and we're going to start up with announcements. Mary, do you have an announcement tonight?
The Westfield Police Athletic League is excited to announce 2 girls' flag football mini camps in Tamaqua Park on April 24th from 4:30 to 5:45 p.m. and June 5th from 11 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. for incoming 2nd through 7th grade girls for the fall 2022 season. Volunteers are needed to help run drill stations. More information is posted under Sports and Recreation on the Community Flyers page on the district and school websites.
Thank you, Mary. Sonal?
As part of Earth Month, the Westfield Green Team Student Auxiliary is holding a student art contest with the theme of What Does Living Greener Mean to You?, focusing on the positive aspects of environmental sustainability. The contest is open to all students. Deadline to submit is April 19th. Contest details are posted on the Community Flyers page of the district and school websites. Email ashleyhu2004@gmail.com with any questions.
Thank you, Sonal. Layla?
The Friends of Westfield Memorial Library is holding its 47th annual used book sale from May 3rd through 7th. Donations will be accepted from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Wednesday and Thursday, April 27th and 28th, and from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturday, April 30th. For more information and to volunteer, visit fwmlnj.org.
Thank you, Layla. Rob?
Sure. The Optimist Club is accepting nominations for the 24th Annual Intermediate School Outstanding Teacher Award, which recognizes 2 teachers each year, one from Edison and one from Roosevelt. Students, parents, staff, and members of the community are encouraged to complete an online nomination form by Friday, May 6th. More information, including the nomination form, is posted under Recent News on the district and school websites and on district social media.
Thank you, Rob. Kristen?
Registration is open for Girls on the Run, an after-school program that meets twice a week for 8 weeks and ends with a celebratory 5K event. The program welcomes girls in grades 3 through 8 of all abilities to have fun, make friends, increase physical activity, and learn important life skills. Visit girlsontherun.newjersey.org for more information and to register. The season begins the week of April 18th and runs through mid-June.
Thank you, Kristen. Mike?
Congratulations to Westfield High School student Natalie Fitzgerald, recent winner of the College Women Clubs of Westfield Essay Contest. A letter to my younger self, which asks sophomore students to include important messages that they may wish to tell their younger self. Natalie's essay suggested that you have to make sure that the friend that you want to have, and reflected on devoting time to family and accepting change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Amy?
The Westfield Green Team is hosting its first Live Greener Fair on April 24th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the North Avenue train station lot. There will be activities for all ages, music, and giveaways while supplies last. Visit the full list of activities for the Live Greener Fair, plus other Earth Month events, at westfieldnj.gov/earth-month. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Sahar, do you have an announcement tonight?
All Westfield public schools will be closed for spring break, yay, on Monday, April 11th through Monday, April 18th. Students will return to school on Tuesday, April 19th, and I just want to note, happy National Arab American History Month.
Thank you, Sahar. The next meeting of the Board of Education will be held at 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, April 26th in Cafeteria B at Westfield High School. The meeting will be live streamed via the district YouTube channel, which viewers can access via the board tab on the district website. Available on Friday, April 22nd, also on the board tab. We look forward to continuing our recognition of our winter student athletes. And actually, there is a correction. Our next meeting is at 6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 26th, not 7:30. That was a typo. All right. And now I move on to Dr. Gonzalez. Do you have a report for us tonight?
No report this evening.
All right. Amy, do you have a SIP report for us?
There we go. Actually, SIP has not had a meeting since our prior board meeting, so I don't have a full update for you. Our next meeting is this coming Friday, April 8th in the morning. I will just recap for the members of the public that we are taking agenda action on the items on the curriculum portion of the agenda. We are approving for second reading curriculum regarding a sports journalism elective class and world languages covering Latin 1, Latin 2, Latin 3, and Latin 3 honors, Latin 4 and Latin 4 AP, and world languages 1. We are also approving 3 district field trips and 2 intern student-teacher candidate names for next year. So those are the items, and we'll have hopefully a more fulsome report at our next meeting.
Thank you, Amy. Mike, do you have a facilities report for us?
Yes, I do. We met earlier today, prior to the board meeting today, and covered a number of different issues. One was the noise issue of the HVAC at McKinley. We had discussed whether or not there's a need to have a consultant go and monitor that. We determined that it wasn't necessary, and they're going to reduce the noise with various bushes and other coverings to try to minimize any noise that's affecting. But we did verify that any noise within that the air conditioner is emitting is within normal guidelines. Elm Street tennis courts, a couple people have contacted us about if there's any renovation to the Elm Street tennis courts planned at this time. There is not. We investigated the cost. The cost came up to over $800,000, and given the current budget, it's just not in the budget to address at this point in time. HVAC renovations. We received bids for the HVAC renovations above what we had expected, so we're pushing those HVAC renovations for Phase 2 to 2023. And then there was an item that came up a couple months ago about the Westfield Soccer Association proposal for Elm Street Field, where they are going to make a donation to go and renovate Elm Street Field through this donation so that we have additional field space for them to play on. So that we're expecting a donation in the next few weeks, and then that project would move forward, most likely after they groom the field and get everything ready. That would be available sometime in 2023. And that is it for this evening, Brendan.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Amy, do you have a facilities finance report for us?
No committee report. The committee hasn't met since our prior board meeting. Our next finance committee meeting will be April 25th, the day before our next board meeting. We're still awaiting, I think, approval from the county superintendent on the tentative budget, and then we'll have a budget hearing on April 26th. Tonight on the agenda, we have 3 finance and facilities motions on the agenda. One is a resolution for internet service, accepting a contract on that. And then item number 2 is approving change orders, one for a change order for internet service and 2 reductions, yay, change orders where there was an allowance in a particular contract that wasn't needed, so we get to take the money back, so that's good. And the final item is approving travel expenses for board members, administrators, and teachers. So those are the agenda items for finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Scrolling ahead here. No long-range planning hasn't met since our last meeting. Negotiations, we are beginning negotiations with our custodians and our paraprofessional associations. We just met as a board to discuss parameters around negotiations, and we'll be beginning those negotiations in the coming weeks. That's it for negotiations. Policies, the policy committee met yesterday and talked about probably 30 policies. We are going to be continuing to recommend changes per the audit that we've done on our policies manual, and adopting the language of Strauss Esme wherever it's in conflict with our current language. They are a professional policy writing service, and the history of Westfield-centric policies isn't serving us well when it comes to ensuring compliance with ever-changing state laws and regulations. So adopting the professionally written policies using more generic language is the recommendation, and we'll continue to push those changes forward. The bulk of it through our next board meeting's agenda, because we did not have time to turn around and notify the whole board of those policy changes from yesterday before today. There will be 2 changes to our bylaws coming at our next board meeting, having to do with the timing of changing policies and bylaws and changing the times and dates of meetings. Again, going with the recommended language from Strauss-Esme. We then moved into, just to give you an idea of the policies we talked about yesterday. Policies, earned sick leave is a mandatory policy. Family leave is a mandatory policy. When I say mandatory, it's required by the state. Prevention and treatment of sports-related concussions and head injuries. Evaluation of teachers is another mandatory policy. Evaluation of teaching staff members, excluding teachers, mandatory policy. Evaluation of administrators, excluding principals, vice principals, and assistant principals. Then evaluation of those principals, vice principals, and assistant principals. Political activities, use of social networking sites, inappropriate staff conduct, use of social networking sites by non-teaching staff members, electronic communication between teaching staff members and students, use of staff members' personal cell phone and telephone and other communication devices, postnatal accommodations, physical examinations, health services personnel, service animals, anti-hazing, bed bugs, and head lice policy. We also looked at our bias crimes and related acts policy. So we were very busy yesterday. We've taken a divide and conquer approach to these policies. We've delegated policies out to the relevant departments through the administration. Different committees have reviewed policies before they come back to the policy committee for final recommendations. We're recommending every policy except the head lice policy will go on our agenda for the April 26th agenda, except for the head lice policy, which will be reviewed by our district physician first. We then started a conversation about our student code of conduct and the review process for that. We've selected a committee and are searching for a date in the next coming weeks where the policy committee will meet with the code of conduct review committee, which is members of the students, teaching staff, parents, community members, administrators, a member of clergy, and a member of law enforcement. We review the code of conduct, make sure it's appropriate, make sure the consequences are in line with community values, and then we'll be coming forth with a recommendation to the board to revise and update our code of conduct. And then lastly, we started the conversation about revising our committee structure, which we continued through our professional development as a board earlier this evening. That will be another bylaw change, which will happen before the end of the year. And lastly, this year we've had 2 snow days that we haven't used, and we'll be giving them back to the students and staff. We're going to be bookending Memorial Day weekend, the Friday before Memorial Day and the Tuesday after Memorial Day. Schools will be closed. We'll be approving that in our governance section of the agenda tonight under, I believe, governance item number 3. Assuming there is no reasons for school to close, so the Friday before and the Tuesday after Memorial Day, school will be closed. If for whatever reason we have to close one more day, school will be open on the Tuesday after Memorial Day, but the Friday before Memorial Day will remain closed. And that is it for policy update for tonight, or policy report. Any questions from board members on any of the reports given before we move on? Yes, sir.
Thanks. Just for our own edification, and first I want to thank Dr. Gonzalez because I know that my understanding is that he helped us identify this need in terms of getting someone who would do the audit, and thanks to the policy committee members. When they make these recommendations based on, I guess, when the auditor makes the recommendations for the text of each policy, is it standard practice for a board to make edits or for staff to make edits, or just to allow us to understand kind of when they bring us these templates for the policies as part of the audit, presumably based on best practices, as you say, It sounds to me like the kind of appropriate path or the best practice is to adopt them unless there is some unique set of circumstances. Is that the usual practice?
Yeah, so the audit itself went through our policy manual and compared the policy number to the policy name and their schedule of policies, and we number our policies based off of their system. So where they said we were missing a policy outright, it's because we didn't have a policy with that number attached to it. That doesn't mean the content wasn't covered in another policy, which was the case with a couple of circumstances. We're working to clean that up. But when they give us a model policy, which is really what it is, it's not so much a template, it's this is what everybody should adopt. But there are sections where it says choose one, or choose the sections that apply, or check here will or will not, and then we'll retype that up into a clean document so that the options that we're not selecting aren't adopted. But it is sort of a choose your own adventure. So that we do have the ability to customize policy, and we can add additional provisions to it. We can remove things that don't apply to us. The reason we're recommending where it makes sense to adopt the full model policy is because it's been written by lawyers, vetted by additional lawyers. Other districts are doing the same thing, and it makes it easy for us to defend the policy that we're enforcing if we're ever challenged on it. Where we get creative and add our own language to things, it might work perfectly, but if there's a problem, we then have to defend it. We have to justify our practice. We have to justify the language we've chosen. Whereas if we're paying a service, it presumably has been vetted to a point that it's legally defensible. Amy?
And it helps make it cleaner when there's updates, right?
Yes.
It makes it a more straightforward process
Absolutely.
to update our own policies if they're more in line with these model policies
Because
that were recommended.
when we get from Strauss Estimate, we get an update. Whenever they revise a policy, they'll give us a red line version of their policy, not a red line version of our policy. So where they've made changes, if we've deviated too far from that, finding what we need to change can be harder. It's not impossible, but it can be harder. So the more streamlined we have it, particularly as we're trying to make our administration more leaner and efficient and less, there will be less staff in central staff. So the less customization we're doing, the less staff resources we're utilizing to modify and create special Westfield policies.
So just in keeping with that, we are trying to go back and streamline these so that we are more in line, because in addition to, if we make our changes, they do have to get reviewed by an attorney, just to make sure. So kind of puts us in a situation that we don't necessarily want to be in.
Yeah. Not every change will require it, but where there's a wholesale change or a substantial deviation from policy, it's a billable hour to an attorney to review. So in a tight budget year, the less we utilize that, the better.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Rob, Kristen, Mike? All right, Mary? All right. Thank you. All right. During this portion of the meeting, district residents and staff are invited to address the Board of Education on agenda action items only. The board requests that individuals state their name and address for the record, the specific action items they're commenting on, and asks that all remarks be directed to the board president or designee, not to individual members or staff. The board asks that members of the public be courteous and mindful of the rights of other individuals in speaking. Specifically, comments regarding personnel matters are discouraged and cannot be responded to by the board. Students and employees have specific legal rights afforded by the laws of the state of New Jersey, and the board bears no responsibility nor will it be liable for any comments made by members of the public. If a matter concerning a district staff member is of interest or concern to a resident, the matter should be referred to the responsible building principal, the superintendent of schools, or the Board of Education, either by telephone, letter, or email. Although the board may not respond to items raised during this public forum, all public comments will be considered. Please note that if a member of the public becomes disruptive during the meeting, the board president may terminate the participant's statement. Continued disruptions may result in removal from the meeting or adjournment of the meeting. Each speaker's statement will be limited to 3 minutes in duration. If you'd like to address the board on action items on the agenda for tonight, please come to the podium. If there's multiple people, please line up along the wall.
Hello, so I need to say my name for the record.
Yes, name and address, please.
Name and address. My name is Yara Essedy, and my address is 239 Tuttle Parkway, Westfield. And I have been a Westfield resident since I was in elementary school, and I went through the entire school system.
Is it related to something on the agenda?
It is. It's related to the DEI initiative.
That is not on the agenda for
That's not
action
on the
tonight.
agenda for today?
No, but if you wait probably 15 minutes, we'll get through our action items, and you'll be able to address us on any topic.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. George?
Kyle George, Short Hills Court. I'll be talking about 2 items on the action agenda. 1, teacher conference expenses, and 2, the new policy 9560, first reading. Line item number 9, in attachment to item number 3, is $2,700 for Dr. Farag to attend the American Educational Research Association annual meeting from April 20th through April 26th in San Diego for the purpose of, quote, to present my research at the annual meeting, exchange ideas, and get information, end quote. What research, I wonder? Well, I found the conference website and looked up the agenda. Dr. Farag is listed as being affiliated with both Westfield Public Schools and Rutgers University. He's presenting at a session entitled, quote, The Anti-Racist Education of White Teachers and Students, end quote, about a paper entitled, quote, Critical Race Theory in White Spaces, a quantitative study of the teachers of white students, end quote. Here are some excerpts from the session abstract. Quote, framed by critical race theory, CRT, this study examined 104 white social studies teachers in predominantly white public school districts. Participants completed a questionnaire involving CRT. Participants reported growing up in predominantly white towns, attending predominantly white schools, policy supporting teachers of white students, and providing professional development focused on CRT are discussed, end quote. I suppose nothing says anti-racist like mentioning race every third word. Anyway, I digress. I mentioned Dr. Farag's CRT research conducted in Westfield before. I won't be deep diving CRT again right now. But what I, and I'm sure other taxpayers want to know, is why the Westfield Public School District is paying almost $3,000 to give Dr. Farag a vacation to San Diego to present CRT research. What is the relevance to the business of Westfield's children that we prioritize spending this money when we have a $2 million budget shortfall? We're going to have to cut 20 teachers in paras, I've heard. Can you honestly look that part-time para who's going to lose her job in the eyes and tell her that this was more important? What about the children that she supports? Dr. Farag is free to pay his own way to present his CRT research conducted in Westfield, but the taxpayers of Westfield should not be paying for this. Additionally, he's co-affiliated with Rutgers University. Why isn't Mrs. E's CRT Center at Rutgers paying for this controversial presentation? I urge you to line item veto this expenditure. New Policy 9560, Administration of School Surveys, attempts to set parameters for student surveys. It's a good start, particularly the parental notice, but it doesn't go far enough. Surveys should be opt-out by default until opt-in by parents. 9560 as written is opt-in by default with the option of opting out. The limits on surveys should be more broadly defined to include all protected areas such as race and gender identity. And finally, sending the results of any surveys to the state should always be explicitly opt-in. Protecting the privacy of students is paramount. You should pause the student portion of the $50,000 Hanover Research DEI survey now until this policy has been revised, passed, and parents have a chance to opt in to this research. Thanks.
All right. If no other members of the public wish to address us on action items, I ask the board to approve the minutes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just want to clarify the question regarding the professional development within the realm of the collective bargaining agreement between the Board of Education and the Westfield Education Association. There is a provision that provides an $80,000 allotment of funds to WEA members for the purpose of professional development. That is a contractual obligation. It's budgeted for each year, and that allocation is based upon each individual teacher. In the event of an instance where an individual's teacher's allotment may exceed or their presentation or conference request may exceed their individual allotment, there is the ability to work with the association to be able to increase that allotment. At the high school level, there is a committee that is involved in reviewing such requests. so that a portion they've decided as a high school community to allocate a third of their funds to be able to pool together to allow for sending individual members to longer or larger conferences. This is being a perfect example. So that a committee of teachers would review it and a committee of teachers would then approve. So the relevance to the district would be reviewed, the value to the district would be reviewed. So in light of the connection to either an individual teacher's teaching responsibility or course, or in relevance to a district initiative, those factors would be considered and the recommendations would be made. So once again, the allocation of these funds are within the operating budget, but they are part of the collective bargaining agreement and within the realm of appropriateness for the district to receive such requests and approve such requests. I think the other item to note is, and I'm not familiar with the extensive history here in the district, but it is something that I've asked around, and certainly it is not outside of the realm of reasonableness to have teachers, administrators, or members of our staff present at a national level. It's actually, in many ways, a distinct honor to have the invitation or selection to be on a national stage to discuss issues relevant to education. So in those instances, those conferences don't always happen in New Jersey, unfortunately, and may require travel, lodging, and meals. So the price associated with those conferences, both to present and attend, may be more costly than typical. But once again, that allocation would also be part of the allocation that I had mentioned before that was stipulated in the contractual agreement. So again, I just wanted to provide some context regarding the procedure for review, as well as the budgeting associated with it.
Dr. Gonzalez, can you also, because you spoke to me very well in the email about the relevance to the district? Because those were very good points you made also, I thought.
Sure. I think overall, if you could give me 2 seconds,
Yes.
the theme of the conference itself is sponsored by the American Education Research Association, AERA, which is the preeminent, education research institution and body. As a graduate student of education, it was certainly the association that I was most familiar with for both, reading, submitting, and reviewing research. That national conference this year was focused on equity and 21st century learning, again, with regards to our district and state initiative. DEI certainly addresses issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the overall theme is certainly related to the district and the state initiatives. And even more so when we look at the presentation by Dr. Farag, the presentation topic and the division that the paper is being presented is all relevant to topics that are specific to the individual course that is being taught. Not necessarily to, again, the topic of CRT we know is something that has been of concern to individuals being taught prematurely in grades or in contexts that are not prepared to or professionally equipped to address. But in the case of the high school level, in the case of this particular course, where CRT is explicitly, infused as part of this curriculum, it would align with the course, both the research and the background, and the presentation would sort of put it in the context of a larger educational conversation. So again, in both instances, they align to district and individual staff member responsibilities.
Right, that's his elective class.
That's correct.
Power and privilege?
Correct.
Yes, thank
Power, privilege, and imbalance in American society.
you.
Hi,
Yes,
sorry.
thank you very much for the whole.
You're welcome,
title.
Mrs. Wickens.
Thank you.
I was here when it was approved, so I just
Just
edited it.
Just to jump in, and maybe make this a little more layman's term. When I put in for a conference, to attend a conference or to get continuing ed credits, or because there's a topic that I'm interested in, I'm not as well known to be asked to present, but maybe one day. But I have to show documentation on how this is going to help me in my job facilitate the growth and education of my students. So it may be a therapy technique, or it may be, a discussion of ethics in the world of speech-language pathology, but I have to prove the relevance. So I'm assuming this committee had to approve that not only is this, I'm going to say professor, that is Dr. Farag going to lecture there, but he will also be listening to lectures and learning and growing and adding to his suitcase of knowledge. Am I correct in assuming this?
You're correct, and I would also add, in instances where that request is made to a particular principal to use district funds, or when I say district funds, school allocated funds versus the collective bargaining agreement allocated funds. There may be an instance where principal would not be able to accommodate that request because their professional development funds are already exhausted. Whereas that's, again, another reason why the WEA allocation affords them the ability to do that. So, and affords them that, flexibility in a way that may not happen otherwise. So, yes.
Right, but it's still, regardless of where the funding is coming from, it still has to be approved to be relevant to increasing the knowledge of whoever's going and adding to the district's resources.
Of course, and on top of it, so this is not taking money out of our salary lines. So we can't take these funds and pay for teachers, can't take these funds and pay for staff. Because we are contractually obligated, we need to make sure we reserve these funds to meet our contractual obligations.
Do we, I heard what was said as far as we're contractually obligated, but do we have the ability to say how the money is, for example, we're using $2,700 approximately for the budget item of about an $80,000 budget. Can we go in, when I look at the conference, I see there's a virtual option, and the virtual option is $185, and they can go and present remotely, and we're increasing the expense exponentially, which is preventing other teachers from doing professional development. So why are we not, I guess, do we have any decision-making power in how the funds are spent so that we can allow as many teachers as possible to do professional development?
So I would add to that the decision-making of the committee, especially at the high school level, the reason it goes to the committee is so that they can make the decision regarding the allocation of those funds, so that if that the request would potentially impact the other or impede the ability of other staff members to go on professional development, that would then be considered and factored into the decision. So in this case, there were still funds available for additional staff to go, so it would not have impacted that. With regards to the decision-making, I mean, the board ultimately still has to approve these,
Okay.
so there is a decision-making aspect, but how the expenditures are being, recommended would come at the recommendation of the administration working with the staff.
And is it also considered that it's taking him out of the classroom for a week versus if he did the remote, he would still be able to be in the classroom?
Not necessarily.
Why not?
Not necessarily, because depending upon the time of lecturing, he may not be available to teach at the same time.
It's 8 p.m. Pacific time.
That's math. I'm do math, but I'd have to look. But
Okay.
you know what I'm saying. Wouldn't necessarily free up the time that he's in class. He may have other obligations.
Okay.
I don't know the teaching schedules, but it wouldn't necessarily mean
No,
that.
I'm talking about when the seminar is. That's when the time. Okay. All right, thank you.
Dr. Gonzalez, can you speak to the composition of this committee that reviews requests?
So the committee, well, it initially goes to the principal and the supervisor. So the principal and the supervisor at the high school level would review the request just to, make sure that there is relevance and value to the school and the district. but does not predetermine that it's pre-approved. It just says, okay, this definitely is, something that we could make connections to what we're doing as a school community, or at least, involved in the individual's teaching responsibilities. The committee is an interdisciplinary committee. In this case, and I don't have it in front of me, I did email. There was, let's see. Yeah.
Science, world languages, and English.
Thank you. Science, world languages, and so it's a rotating opportunity for individuals to sit on this committee, so that no single department is overrepresented. But those individual departments would have responsibility for reviewing all departmental requests.
So in this case, somebody from the social studies department wasn't even involved in approving it. Peer departments decided it was an appropriate use of district funds.
Correct.
Okay. Brendan, just point of order, has public comment for the first public comment period closed?
Yes.
Okay, so if someone wanted to make comment, they should probably take their seat?
Yes.
Okay.
I started closing out. Public comment on the action items is closed? Yeah, where you don't engage in a debate, back and forth.
Did we close it? I didn't hear it close, I'm sorry. Okay.
When we start discussing it, I mean, yeah,
Okay, all right, so you can come back.
yeah, because I started moving to
In the open
approve
comment.
minutes. Public comment, our second public comment session will open briefly. Our second public comment session will open briefly once we get through our agenda items. Thank you, Amy. Rob?
So I'm going to part company a little. I'm going to be a lot simpler about this. Presenting a graduate paper done for a graduate course at a graduate institution to a conference focused on graduate work is something to be celebrated as far as I'm concerned. And if we were the Rutgers Board of Regents, I would approve this in about a second and a half because it's clearly relevant to what's being done in the course and the purpose for which it's there. In this particular instance, I'd love to see this approved, and I just don't see the relation here. So I'll be a no on that. The topic to me is inconsequential. I don't care what the topic is. If you're going to do graduate work for a graduate course at a graduate institution, your graduate institution should pay for it, and they should pay for it quickly and happily for the notoriety it's going to get the institution. It's really just as simple as that for me. So it's the right move, but just the wrong check to be written, in my opinion.
I have a different view than Mr. Bonaccio. I think that when we are, yep, I believe this is a class that is available to juniors and seniors, is that correct? We have a 97% college admission rate, which is good. And part of the job of a high school teacher, especially when dealing with juniors and seniors, is to prepare them for college. I think when you have a teacher that is able to learn, produce knowledge, research, network with whether it's college professors or high school teachers that are also teaching at that level, that helps our students, whatever the subject matter is, because their education doesn't stop at the high school level. And in fact, I can tell you that one of the biggest grievances or concerns, I'll say, of many college professors at the undergrad level is that they feel the high schools are not preparing them for that level. And so to the extent that we have teachers who have those skills and who have those abilities and the credentials, I think whatever the subject is, I think it helps our kids. So I'm going to just take issue with that. And I just want to note that this is not the first time that we have had individuals attack this particular teacher. I want to support our teachers. I want to express my support for them, and I want to acknowledge that our role as the board is not to decide whether they're online or in person or whether they go to this conference or that conference. we defer to the staff and the expertise of the staff for that. And so, based on Dr. Gonzalez's explanation of the WEA agreement, there's a committee, there's a process. This is not a unilateral decision where someone just says, I'm going to use these funds for this, but there are professionals involved, and we have to respect them and defer to them. They're teaching our children, and I think they're doing a pretty good job.
Brenda, can I comment?
Oh, sorry, Mike.
Thank you, Sahar.
So, yeah, as a board, we have to have fiduciary responsibility to our residents and how money is being spent. And if we have an option where they can attend online, no problem with them attending the course. But if we have the option to go and do it at a fraction of the cost and allow other teachers to go and have their own professional development so we can spread the wealth around, we should consider that as an option.
Can I just jump in here? So I think making this personal is not really the way to go here. Talking about, well, this particular professor is asking, or we've attacked this particular professor before. I think the issue to me is that this was an email we got late, and I think that a lot of these questions could have been discussed prior. Like I didn't even get this email, for example, because my computer doesn't work when I'm in this building for some reason. That's my fault. But I think that sometimes the more information you get, like knowing about the committee, knowing about the process for applying, all of that information is helpful, because then you have questions answered. I don't think that it necessarily is about an attack on one teacher or not. It's just having information. We are financially responsible for the district, so I think asking the questions is acceptable. I think it makes sense to ask the questions. I think it's fair, regardless of who is teaching the class or who's asking for the conference. So I do think it's fair, but I think when you get information late, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to process all that information, so maybe that's part of the confusion. So I think that's just something to think about moving forward.
I also agree with that. There was an issue with our emails.
Right.
But I also agree with what Sahar was saying, is that the committee went through a process for this, and we need to trust that process. That's what they're there for. The superintendent has put their trust in them, and we need to put our trust in him and our teachers for what is best for our students. And they wouldn't have gone through the committee process and said, we don't have enough money, or we don't have enough for other teachers to go. If that was the case, I'm sure they would have said that, because they want all of their teachers to benefit from professional development. So I trust that they went through the process correctly and that this was appropriate.
If I could just address the suggestion that this was late. This was not late. This was provided to the board, at the time that I received the inquiry. So I just want to make sure that it's understood.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that you were late. I mean, we got it late to
Right,
before
I
the
think
meeting, not a ton of time to look it over and ask questions. The board discussion came late.
No, it was part of the WBOE.
No, I sent it today in addition to the clarification, but it wasn't sent at an earlier time. So I just wanted to make sure that people didn't think that this had been presented, because the committee description that I just shared tonight applies to all the PD that has been approved throughout the course of the year. So because this had a high price tag, admittedly, definitely drew the attention, and understandably so. So I agree, it's an appropriate question to ask. So I just wanted to make sure that all the board members had the response, the benefit of that response, as again I'm learning as well the nuances of how the funds are allocated per the contract.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply you sent it late. I mean, we received the information about the process right before the meeting, so some of us didn't get to see it, so we couldn't have the chance to ask the questions before. So I apologize.
Go ahead. I just wanted to make a comment, which is I'm one of the longer-standing board members on here at the table tonight, and I just wanted to clarify that one of the reasons we didn't have that information before is that we typically follow our role as board members, which is to not administer the district, but to see that the district is well run. So as we have talked about, the fact that we now know there is a process, there is, there are people that are closer to this than we are. There's a reason why we don't typically get into the details of whether someone attends a conference virtually or not. So I'm glad we learned about the process. To me, that provides the information I needed to know. Also, because I've been on the board a little bit longer, I've been part of the negotiations process, so I understand that when something is in a contract, it's there for association members to use, and it's there for a reason, because we want our staff members to be educated and to be well-versed in teaching practices. So we encourage teachers where possible to utilize these funds according to the process, because we feel it helps them and it helps our students. That's it.
Absolutely. And when something has an extra decimal point, it's our job to ask for the process. And if there's a valid mechanism in place to approve the spending of those funds, then it's for us to decide what's a good expenditure and a bad expenditure outside of the overall budget process is getting in the weeds. I might not agree with the expense, but the process is sound.
So I just have a question. I agree with the process, and I think with what Amy, what you said, that is enough information I need. But maybe to help everybody understand, the $80,000, do you know if that's per year, and is that per the school year? So it ends this June or July?
It's $80,000 per year per the WEA contract.
Per the contract. So as we're already in April, now that they're getting these requests, if there are funds, then they're going to approve them, as long as the committee agrees that there is a reason to approve them.
Right, and it's a valid assumption that this might not be approved in September for the reason you just brought up. Layla? Okay. All right. If there are no other questions or comments from board members, I ask the board to approve the minutes of the March 15th and March 22nd, 22 board meetings, and the March 15th and 22nd executive session minutes. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any have to abstain? All right. With that, moving on, I ask the board to approve governance item number 1. This is superintendent's decision HIB incident 22E13, 22F03, 22MC03, and 22HS03 for the reasons set forth therein. Can I have a second? Thank you, Amy. Dana?
Sahar Aziz,
Yes.
Robinaccio,
Yes.
Mike Beelan,
Yes.
Brendan Galligan,
Yes.
Layla Morelli,
I abstain.
Sonal Patel,
Yes?
Amy Root, yes, Kristen Sonic Schmeltz,
Yes.
Mary Wickens.
Yes.
Thank you. And now I ask the board to approve governance items numbers 2 and 3. Can I have a second? Thank you, Layla. Governance item number 2 is the student activity fee for the 2022-2023 school year. This fee is, again, staying flat following we haven't raised it since we implemented it over a decade ago. By law, we have to review it every year, and every year we agree that no change or increase is recommended. Governance item number 3 is the revised calendar for this current school year, and it details the return of snow days around Memorial Day, as I detailed during my report. Any questions? All right. Dana?
Sahar Aziz,
Yes.
Robinaccio,
Yes.
Mike Beelan,
Yes.
Brendan Galligan,
Yes.
Layla Morelli,
Yes.
Sonal Patel,
Yes?
Amy Root, yes, Kristen Sonic Schmeltz,
Yes.
Mary Wickens.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And now I ask the board to approve policy items numbers 1 through 13. Can I have a second? Thank you, Sonal.
Personnel, you mean?
Sorry. Yeah. What did I say? I meant personnel. There's only one policy item. So Dr. Gonzalez, do you have any policy, personnel items you'd like to address? Or we're changing policies
Wait, I'm
and
sorry.
personnel to different names, so I'm
Who
tired of this.
seconded before you?
Sonal.
Zonal? Okay, thank you.
Sure. Tonight, I'm announcing with regret the retirement of Harry Morris. For more than 35 years, she has been a valued secretary in the Office of Special Services, where she supported the child's study teams with thoroughness and accuracy. She is a master of tact and graciousness in her interactions with parents, external service providers, and the community at large. Harry will miss her work and her colleagues, but she is looking forward to having the time to pick up her grandson from the school in the afternoons. We wish her a happy and healthy retirement.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Any other questions or comments from board members on personnel items? All right, Dana?
Sahar Aziz,
Yes.
Rob Bonaccio,
Yes.
Mike Beelan,
Yes.
Brendan Galligan.
Yes.
Leila Morelli. Yes. Sonal Patel,
Yes.
Amy Root. Yes. Kristen Sonic-Schmelz,
Yes.
Mary Wickens.
Yes.
Amy?
Yes, I would like the board to consider finance and facilities items 1 through 3. Could I have a second? Mary, thank you for the second. Just to be clear, finance item 1 is again approving the resolution for the contract for internet service. Finance item 2 is change orders for 3 particular contracts, 1 going up a bit and 2 going down. And finance item number 3 is to approve, in accordance with policy 6471, travel expenses for board members, administrators, and teachers. As attached, for the record, there are 27 items there. Any further comment or questions? No? Oh, okay. All right.
Sahar
then-
Aziz? Yes.
Rob Bonaccio?
Yes to 1 and 2, no to 3. If it's all done in one package, then yes.
Mike Beelan?
Yes to 1 and 2, yes to 3, except line item 9.
Brendan Galligan?
Yes.
Leila Morelli?
Yes.
Sonal Patel?
Yes.
Amy Root? Yes to all items. Kristen Sonic-Schmelz?
Yes.
Mary Wickens?
Yes.
All right. Now I ask the board to approve policy item number 1. Thank you, Amy. This is to approve for first reading policy 2415.05, student surveys, analysis, evaluations, examinations, testing, and/or treatment. 2431.8, varsity letters for interscholastic extracurricular activities. 2460.30, additional compensatory special education and related services. 2468, independent educational evaluations. 2622, and the regulations attached for student assessments. 5116, and the regulations for education of homeless children, and 9560, administration of school surveys. Any questions?
Sorry, getting someone's attention.
Okay.
Sahar Aziz?
Yes.
Rob Bonaccio?
Yes.
Mike Beelan?
Yes.
Brendan Galligan?
Yes.
Leila Morelli?
Yes.
Sonal Patel?
Yes.
Amy Root? Yes. Kristen Sonic-Schmelz?
Yes.
Mary Wickens?
Yes.
All right, Amy?
Yep, I would like the board to consider curriculum items 1, 2, and 3. Could I have a second, please? Thank you, Kristen. Again, as I outlined in my report, item number 1 is to approve for second reading the English sports journalism elective, world languages Latin 1, 2, 3, and 3 honors, and Latin 4 and 4 AP, and world languages number 1. Item number 2 is to approve 3 district field trips for the remainder of the year. And curriculum item number 3 is to approve intern and student teacher candidates for next year, 1 for part of the year and 1 for the full year. Any questions or comments on any of those items?
Just a comment that I'm excited to see the products of the sports journalism class expand the offerings of the High Eye and our Blue Devil TV programs.
I agree, and I hope that we are inviting many more teams back to celebrate accomplishments like we did
Absolutely.
tonight. That was great.
Ready for vote? Sahar Aziz,
Yes.
Robin Nacho,
Yes.
Mike Beelan,
Yes.
Brendan Galligan,
Yes.
Layla Morelli,
Yes.
Sonal Patel,
Yes.
Amy Root,
Yes?
Kristen Sonic-Schmeltz,
Yes.
Mary Wickens.
Yes.
All right, ask the board to note the notes for the record. Any unfinished business? Any new business? Liaison reports. All right, no liaison reports? Go for it, Mike.
Small update. I was at the recreation. I just noticed I was off. Pool registration is open. There's a park cleanup scheduled for 5/1 with the green team. You can check the Westfield website. And also, if you are interested in registering your child for the summer camp programs, you should check, especially with Jefferson, because they're starting to fill up. So just check the Town of Westfield Recreation website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any other liaison reports? All right. During this portion of the meeting, members of the public are invited to address the Board of Education on any topic. The board requests that individuals state their name and address for the record and asks that all remarks be directed to the board president or designate, not to individual board members or staff. The board asks that members of the public be courteous and mindful of the rights of other individuals when speaking. Specifically, comments regarding personnel matters are discouraged and cannot be responded to by the board. Students and employees have specific legal rights afforded by the laws of New Jersey, and the board bears no responsibility nor will be liable for any comments made by members of the public. If a matter concerning a district staff member is of interest or concern to a resident, the matter should be referred to the responsible building principal, superintendent of schools, or the Board of Education, either by telephone, letter, or email. Although the board may not respond to all items raised during this public forum, all public comments will be considered. Please note that if a member of the public becomes disruptive during the meeting, the board president may terminate the participant's statement. Continued disruptions may result in a removal from the meeting or adjournment of the meeting. Each speaker's statement will be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes in duration. If you'd like to address the board on any topic at this time, please come to the podium. Additional speakers, please line up along the wall.
Hello. So as I said earlier, my name is Yara Essity, and my address is 239 Tuttle Parkway, Westfield, New Jersey. And I have been a part of the Westfield school system since I was in elementary school at Franklin and went through Roosevelt and then went through Westfield High School and graduated in 2018. So now that I've introduced myself, I want to address a topic related to the DEI initiative that the school board has been examining. I am an Arab American who was born in New Jersey to 2 Palestinian parents. When I was growing up here in the U.S., I was told that America is a country of immigrants and that its history is intertwined with the stories of those immigrants, no matter how recent they were. Once I began my schooling, however, I started to notice large gaps in my education. For example, my schooling mainly focused on European history and European American history. Although many of the early settlers were European, they brought along African slaves with them. They also engaged in the erasure of Native Americans and their culture. Moreover, there were millions of other immigrants that came in the following centuries who came all from different corners of the world. These stories, however, are repeatedly told from the perspective of white Americans rather than by those marginalized groups. This is where the DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative comes in. Those marginalized voices will be lost with time if we do not teach them to our students through books, narratives, and films. One example of how American selective storytelling has impacted my life was during the refugee crisis in Syria. I belonged to a student population that had no idea how to grasp the modern-day civil war, even though the U.S. played a major role in Syria's downfall. Students from Westfield would turn to me with their complicated foreign policy questions or ignorant statements about my culture. And there I was, the only Arab in the room, left to defend an entire ethnicity. Had my teachers been required to discuss more contemporary international issues, I would have not had the responsibility to properly educate my peers. My fellow students had only been exposed to the intersection of Middle Eastern history and American history through the current media that they consume, which can be unreliable and many times incomplete. Classrooms are a place for open discussion and learning, yet people would bring half-baked ideas about the Middle East because their teachers never informed them otherwise. What these students are missing is the lengthy history of intersections between the Middle East and the United States and Europe. These courses are supposed to inform the next generation of students not to make the mistakes of their predecessors, and yet our school system seems resistant to giving them those tools. It is for this reason that I asked for the Board of Education to pass the DEI initiative,
30 seconds.
because the school system should not rely on its token minority population students to do the heavy lifting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jan Onishi. I live at 759 Knollwood Terrace. I have attended several Board of Education meetings and have described my concerns about regularly exposing children to artificial turf. Children attending Edison Intermediate School are exposed every day when they take physical education at Keller Stadium. Their exposure will increase if you build 2 full-size athletic fields covered with artificial turf behind Edison Intermediate School. They take their lunch recess on these fields. I completed a literature search trying to understand why there is such confusion about whether regular play on artificial turf fields cause cancer or endocrine diseases. I have shown that the research is incomplete. Key experiments to prove that the fields are safe or not for children regularly playing them have not been completed. The research on artificial turf and children's health is inconclusive because it is incomplete. Inconclusive research does not mean that the fields are safe. What will you do with the fields behind Edison Intermediate School? Will you do the responsible thing? If you sign a letter of intent with the town to develop 2 full-size athletic fields behind Edison, will you require that natural grass fields be installed rather than artificial turf behind Edison Intermediate School? You are responsible for the health of all the children who will attend Edison presently and for 30 years. 30 years is the lease period if the town and you sign the present letter of intent. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Eaton. I live at 762 Knollwood Terrace. I look back to July 2021 when we first found out about the Edison Field project plan. Over 9 months later, much research has been done and both time and money have been spent by residents in the neighborhoods, reviewing the plan, identifying safety, health, financial, noise, traffic, parking, and quality of life issues, with alternative solutions being recommended. As of today, the only change to have taken place that I'm aware of with respect to the Edison Field plan is a reduction in artificial turf from 400,000 square feet to 250,000 square feet. Tower lights are still a part of the plan, and significant parking traffic issues have yet to be addressed. We still have the 250,000 square feet of artificial turf with all of its attendant health risks to children and nearby neighborhoods. This is unacceptable. This plan in its current state will ruin our neighborhoods and create significant health, safety, traffic, and noise concerns for students, athletes, and residents permanently. Residents will have to deal with these issues permanently as long as they live in Westfield near the school. Some of us are retired and others are still working. We would rather spend our time doing other things, but this effort to push back on this Edison Field plan is too important. Grass fields with no lights can be the solution if we work together. There are multiple locations which can increase field capacity and with no need for games at night. Grass fields with no lights can be the solution if we work together. There are multiple locations which can increase field capacity, once again, and with no needs for games at night. The Edison Field plan is overly intrusive, unsafe, and needs to be revamped significantly. Lots of data have been presented to the Town Council, the Board of Education, Board of Health, and Recreation Committee, supporting the issues being raised. It's time to decide that artificial turf and tower lights are not a viable solution.
We can become proud of our athletic fields by establishing
seconds.
more locations already identified with natural grass, improved field maintenance, and no lights. We need to hire a professional field manager. In closing, even if I lived in a different neighborhood other than Knollwood Terrace, I would still be against this Edison Field project plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Maria Tadaro. I live at 758 Knollwood Terrace. I've lived in Westfield for 45 plus years. I'm going to try to speak quickly and get through this. I have written letters and also posted comments on Facebook regarding the plan to remove grass fields at Edison, replace them with synthetic turf. I have made statements based on my doing well over 100 hours of research. My letters and postings were not opinions. They presented facts corroborated many times over by scientists and researchers. I want to read portions of a letter written on behalf of the Children's Environmental Health Center, ICANN School of Medicine, Mount Sinai. This letter is only one example out of many that came to the same conclusion. If we are to use the precautionary principle when making decisions that impact the health and safety of our children, we absolutely need to make those decisions based on scientific findings, and that will have us err on the side of caution. Who better to opine on this topic than an alliance of pediatricians, epidemiologists, and laboratory scientists whose entire mission solely on behalf of children is, and I quote, the prevention, diagnosis, management, and treatment of health issues that arise from environmental exposures. These experts, again I quote, strongly discourage the installation of artificial turf fields, citing several known and suspected risks. The letter explains why children and young adults are uniquely vulnerable to harmful exposures from artificial turf. Their studies cite factors such as a child's rapidly developing organ systems, immature detoxification mechanisms, a higher surface area to body mass ratio, faster breathing compared to adults, their bodies sweating less than adults, many factors that put them at, quote, greater risk of inhalation of chemicals that off-gas from turf fields and increase, quote, susceptibility to heat injuries and illness. They clearly, and again I quote, recommend a moratorium on the use of artificial surfaces where children play. The letter identifies several potential dangers that playing on recycled rubber poses. Some of those are the extreme heat recorded as high as 160 degrees.
30 seconds.
Posing real risk of burns, dehydration, and stress, and heat stroke. They have other concerns, such as the inhalation, ingestion, and absorption of toxic and carcinogenic chemicals, and the transportation home of infill materials on the play surfaces as they break down into smaller pieces and fine particles, as they are picked up on children's shoes, clothing, skin, and tracked into homes, cars, places where children live, play, eat, and sleep.
Thank you for your comment. Your time is
Just
up.
50 more seconds.
Finish your sentence.
Okay, they end the letter by saying that safe play areas are an essential component of any school environment, but urge the township to maintain natural grass fields in order to protect the health of the children in their community. And I have the letters here, copies
Thank you.
of the letters. May I pass them out? Thank you.
Bashar Asadi, 239 Tuttle Parkway, Westfield. I'm the father of the young lady who spoke earlier about the diversity and the inclusion. And in that line, I do support what was actually availed to Mr. Farage to participate in that conference in California. And actually, I encourage the not just the Board of Ed, but Mr. Gonzalez, which is I really enjoyed your response to the comment, and I applaud it, and I would like to see more of that. We need to see more of that interaction between our teachers and educators at in higher education setting, because we will benefit from that, especially in the field of that Mr. Farage was participating, would be participating in, was participating, I don't know. But my point is that we need to get more of that to happen, so that we improve our teachers' capabilities and also widen their horizon. Because Mr. Farage actually taught both my older son and my daughter, and they actually enjoyed being in Mr. Farage's class because of that vision that he had, the attitude that he has towards teaching. And I think I would encourage the board and the school system to do more of that, not less. And thank you.
Thank you.
Kyle George, excuse me, Kyle George, Short Hills Court. It's not about the person, it's about the ideology. CRT ideology has no place in K through 12. And it doesn't matter who's slinging the ideology. On a different topic, I've heard credible reports of an incident that many parents are talking about. I've seen posts on social media as well as private conversation. I think it's very important to talk about this publicly and seek assurances that sufficient district-wide corrective action has been taken. To be clear, this has not happened to my children, but I'm concerned that it could happen, and even more concerned that I wouldn't be told about it. Reportedly, an unnamed specials teacher at a Westfield elementary school gave an unauthorized lesson about sexual orientation and LGBTQ activism to elementary school students as part of a lesson. As part of the lesson, students were allegedly told that a double-digit percentage of them in the room would be LGBTQ. Let me be very, very clear. All families and students deserve equal treatment regardless of sexual orientation or identity. I personally have LGBTQ members of my extended family, and they are deeply, deeply loved and accepted. But we do not need school officials meddling with the development of our children. It's not their business, and it's wrong. This kind of discussion should happen between parent and child. Back when I was in school, which wasn't that long ago, if you asked a teacher about their personal life, political views, etc., they would tell you it's their private business, and they were right. Back then, this decorum was upheld universally. Why can't we focus on academics and bring this back? The school district needs to resoundingly acknowledge parental rights to be informed and involved in the education of our children. These are our children, not the state's. Curriculum and pedagogy must avoid indoctrination. Teaching young children about gender identity and sexual topics are controversial issues, especially at the K through 5 level. I've seen the sample curriculum coming from the state that's supposed to be taught next year. And despite what this board has tried to assert a few times, it is real. Regarding controversial issues in general, I've asked repeatedly since March of 2021 for the revision of the controversial issues policy to be put back on the policy agenda, and it continues to be missing. On another topic, this past week there was another swastika found in the high school. Despite all the No Place for Hate rallies and the bathroom lockdowns and surveillance, this continues to happen. I've heard that even the Jewish students are often cited to lead sessions, similar to the burden depicted by an earlier speaker on her ethnicity. Clearly, all these things aren't working. Instead of holding hollow sessions, we need to be teaching the history of this evil symbol and how it represents the deaths of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust and the forced sacrifice of so many who worked to defeat the Axis powers. I spoke last time about the Holocaust curriculum. I've also spoken recently about the nexus of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitic tweets coming, or retweets coming from the BOE VP. There continues to be a steady stream of these tweets. I did not see any contemporaneous tweets that condemn the recent terrorist attacks against Israelis, yet I did see more tweets calling Israel an apartheid state. I'll say again, how can we truly be committed to addressing the issue of anti-Semitism here when the BOE leadership is constantly spewing this rhetoric? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. George.
Jill Vogel, I live on Baker Avenue. I also want to talk about the sex ed education that's incoming. There have been comments from board members over the past couple meetings about how parents are going to be able to opt their kids out of these curriculum and the topics that are going to be coming in. And then we have this incident that occurred at one of the elementary schools that services 1st through 5th grade. Did this happen in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, where this teacher, who wasn't even one of the classroom teachers or the PE teacher, it was a specials teacher, art or music, was teaching these things and talking to these students off the cuff. I had reached out to my own principal about the incident, and she told me she hadn't heard about it, and I know it happened weeks ago. So is this something that's not being addressed by the district at all? Because I think that in order to prevent it from happening again, and in order to protect the students that you were elected and hired to protect, it really needs to become an issue that you're talking about, where you're letting everybody in the district know exactly what happened and that it's not going to be tolerated or accepted again. These are little kids, and these are our little kids, and they don't deserve to be targeted by adults who are speaking out of line. If this was my child that this had happened to, I'd be standing up here with my lawyer. Like, you're really lucky that whatever happened at that school, it didn't get to that level. And I think that you need to do everything in your power to make sure that it doesn't happen again. If parents are told that they have the right to opt out, this shouldn't be coming up in other specials. This is something that isn't even supposed to be coming up until next year. So it is really something that you have to deal with and address and make it known to your staff and every adult in your district that this isn't going to be tolerated, because the parents aren't going to tolerate it. And this is just the start, and it's not even officially begun. So I really think that it's something that you need to publicly make a statement about what happened, because parents are already talking about it and word is spreading, and nobody's happy that it happened.
Good evening, Elizabeth Wolf, First Street, Westfield. I just am here to say thank you for all of your volunteer hours and all of your work. To also say I've learned a lot tonight. It was very informative to learn about the process for teachers to get to go to conferences and the money that's part of their contract. I think that's great, and it's great news. I think that it's important that you know that I and many people that I know are extremely proud of this district and of the fact that we have the Power and Privilege course, and of the fact that we have teachers like Dr. Faraj, who is going above and beyond and, has done this research and written these papers, attending these conferences. I think it shows very well for us. These are very important topics. We all know that. The DEI initiative is really important and strong, and so I think that it's important for you to hear this, another supporting voice for that, and I'm very pleased that that was approved. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other members of the public who wish to address us tonight. Public comment is now closed. Dr. Gonzalez, would you like to address any comments made tonight?
No.
Okay. Motion to adjourn? Thank you, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.